We have about 90 minutes, just less than that now. I'll make sure that we don't run over. So we're going to crack straight on, and I'll let Dan, then Manvir, then Bethany, then Tom introduce themselves.
Okay, I guess it's time for oh, sorry, one sec. I had the YouTube link on for some reason. Hi, my name's Dan. I'm 23 and I just finished up my time in University College Cork here in Ireland. I was the editor-in-chief for Motley Magazine for the last academic year. Before that, I was involved in our radio station and Motley Magazine as just a section editor before that. I love films, I love trains, and I also am looking forward to Christmas, so much so that I decided to combine both my loves. So this is both, I'm wearing a TFL Christmas jumper. It's quite fun. But yeah, looking forward to the event, looking forward to sharing any insights I might be able to give you guys, and I'll shut up now.
Great. Manvir?
Hi, my name is Manvir. My pronouns are she, her. I'm in my third year at the University of Edinburgh studying history and Spanish. And last year I was the features editor at our student newspaper called The Student. Then I became the editor-in-chief. And now I am the arts and cultures editor for an online blog called Clickbait. And I'm also looking forward to Christmas, but I don't have a Christmas jumper on. So yeah.
Fantastic. And Bethany?
Hi, I am Bethany. I am a final year politics and sociology student, and I am the current editor-in-chief of Incite, which is the politics magazine at the University of Surrey. Last year, I was the deputy editor and was editor-in-chief, co-editor-in-chief on a few of our issues. I love Incite. I'm excited to give you an insight into it. Huh? And outside of uni and Incite, I'm also a freelance journalist, and I'm very upset that I don't have a TFL Christmas jumper.
Fantastic. And last but not least, Tom.
Hi, I'm Tom. I just graduated from Bristol Uni, so I was the digital editor of Epigram there, so that's the independent newspaper. And yeah, I'm freelancing a little bit and also trying to look for a job at the moment, which I'm sure for everyone is quite hard. So yeah, excited to share what I learned on the digital side of a student newspaper.
Fantastic. It's safe to say we've got a really fantastic spread of people with lots of different experiences and bits of knowledge. So I'm hoping that they will apply to everyone who's kind of joined us today. But just to give you a heads up, this session's being recorded for those people who weren't able to make it. So it's on speaker view, so you'll only be sort of seen if you choose to speak. You can feel free to tweet along and tag us at SPA Journalism. I think that is it. We're going to just start with a couple of questions from me for the panel, a couple of group ones, and then one or two sort of specific ones based on their experience. But if you have any questions as well, then they would be brilliant to hear. We're going to try and do this in two halves. So get thinking of them now. You can either raise your hand and we'll come to them in the second half, or you can type them in the chat and we will come to them as soon as we can. So to start off, why don't we go in reverse order to the one that we've just had? So we'll go Tom, Bethany, Manvir, then Dan. Why don't you just talk us through a little bit about what sort of place your publication was like before you took charge and what kind of advice you'd wish you'd had when you were starting out?
Yeah, so Epigram was in pretty good shape when we took it over in terms of how it was organised, and personally my handover from the last digital editor was really good. One thing I would say which is helpful, especially if you're on the digital side of things, is quite a lot of like computers and apps have a screen record function. So instead of just explaining this is how you do stuff, the older digital editor screen recorded a lot of the stuff and then put that in a folder. So whenever I had an issue, I could just have a look exactly how it was done. So that was good. Financially, like all student publications, we didn't have a lot of money, and especially because we don't get money from the SU either, that was quite hard. But we managed in the end, did a bit of fundraising, and yeah. So yeah, I was quite happy with the state of Epigram when we inherited it.
Great. Manvir? I think it was you next, or did I skip somebody? I think it is.
I think it was Bethany. I'm sorry.
Sorry. Yep, you're right, Bethany. Let's hear
Happy
it.
to make. So Incite we're new and really, really small. So we're only 5 years old. We were the Politics Society magazine, so we weren't even our own society. 2 weeks ago, we became our own society, which is really exciting and really important for our funding. So there's been quite a lot of relatively boring admin to do when it comes to growing Incite this year. The main thing that we wanted to do aside from that was grow the pool of contributors to Incite, because we're a politics magazine. Firstly, it's really easy to only get politics students. Secondly, it's really easy to get a very specific group of politics students that can like read party manifestos in their sleep. So we really wanted to grow the kind of things that we do, make sure that we're not just sort of copy and paste versions of the political section of a newspaper. So the way that we've done that is, unlike other years, we've created themed issues. So instead of whatever comes at whatever time and print that, we are doing specific themes. So here's one I literally made earlier. This was the first issue, and this is on Black Lives Matter. This is the biggest issue we've ever done. It looks so pretty, and I'll come to that in a sec actually. And it's meant that we can tailor the content to underrepresented issues within the student body generally, but also specifically to Surrey. The final thing that we really, really wanted to do was have a proper designer, a proper head of design. We hadn't had that before. So we now have one. I luckily live with him, so I can badger him when I need something to look pretty, because I'm rubbish at that. But it's been really good. We also have an artist who specifically wants to do stuff. So this is our front cover, really pretty. That is not a picture, it is a digital drawing. And that has definitely meant that Incite becomes more eye-catching and more people want to grab it when they pass, rather than just people in the politics department who happen to know it exists. And so far, all of that's worked. The readership and writership has grown a lot since the beginning of this year.
Thank you so much. Nice little book plug in there as well. Manvir.
Hi. So specifically with the student, I think that the newspaper was quite well established already. Apparently, it's the oldest newspaper in the UK, or student-run newspaper in the UK, which is an exciting fact, but that fact alone isn't going to save a newspaper. And I think that's something that I think my co-editor-in-chief and I realised when we stepped into the position, because the newspaper was running nicely, but it could have been doing better. And I think specifically with this newspaper as well, we had a digital edition, but we also printed bi-weekly too. And so I think that in terms of printing, that costs a lot of money, and we had to think about the environmental impact as well. So we're trying to juggle all of these things, also along with something which we thought was really important about kind of honing back student journalism back to the students as a whole, because I think that in general now, a lot of people, especially when it comes to writing just in general on the internet, are very worried about, their footprint that they leave behind, so they want to be particularly careful with their words. And that's really important, obviously, because you don't want to write silly things. But I also think that it meant that people were quite hesitant, and like Bethany was saying about recycling articles, it almost felt like it was becoming that. So we kind of wanted to bring it back to something that was very unique to the University of Edinburgh, or just students in general, and also make it a bit more kind of free-spirited and fun. Just that we did kind of get engagement back at the newspaper, which I think worked. We made that our key message, and I think people replied to that. So I think just before this Zoom call started and came live, Bree told me, made me remember that my last editorial was entitled "Everything is Fact," which is very clickbaity, but it was talking about how student journalism is going through a big transformation at the moment and is potentially kind of on the line. And I wanted to highlight that to a wider audience who might not be thinking about that, because I think unless you are involved in student journalism, it's very easy to think that it isn't an important issue. So I think it was good at highlighting that to many people. And so, yeah, I think we did a good job at doing that.
Excellent. And finally, Dan, tell us about your paper and how you what it was like when you took it over.
Okay. Yes, I remember when I took over back in April 2019. I was excited, but I was also extremely nervous because I'd been involved in the magazine as the entertainment editor beforehand, but I'd never like had to step into like that kind of leadership role before. But the surprise, like to my surprise, the handover was actually, it went very smoothly because I got along well with the editor before me, Lucas Broom. He was very good. He took me through. Well, he took me through everything. There was a very solid handover doc. There was a procedure of he just stayed there with me for a while, training me into the role. And then for the first few interviews, when I was interviewing my potential staff members, he sat in on that with me as well. Obviously, I was the one who had to make the call, but I just asked him for his input and all that. And it just made it really easy, having not only a former editor with so much experience behind it, but also someone that I call a good friend, like just sitting there helping me. So that made it a lot easier, very easy. As for how I inherited the magazine, we were very proud of the magazine. Like even when I was there, it's like in the past, it's like I won a lot of awards from the in the National Irish Student Media Awards. But in the past few years, it had there have been a small, I guess, decline in popularity on campus. We have two publications ourselves and the University Express, which is the newspaper, and you could definitely say that the paper had a bit more footfall than we did. So that was something that I wanted to improve. But I think the biggest thing that I wanted to take under my belt and improve was our social media. It was a little bit non-existent in years before. We had social media, but we just weren't reaching out. And I felt that it was important because our biggest readership does come from the online, and a nice blend of the online and the print. So I wanted to increase our social media traffic and also get more people, engaging with us online. And to do that, I hired a public relations officer to run our social network. So social media networks. And I worked very well with him as well and the team. And together with the team, we managed to boost our social networking traffic a lot. And it was just doing fun little things. Like, for example, when we released our first issue, we had the bright idea of taking the cover and blurring it, so it was all pixels, and getting people to guess. And when the person who got it right, we gave it was a mini PS1, like a classic PS1, just a prize we managed to get from the local GameStop. But that drove a lot of traffic, and that got a lot of people interested. And obviously those things are gimmicks, but it's a good way of reaching out to your audience, I guess. And the second thing that we wanted to change was our carbon footprint. Beforehand, we were printing quite a lot, and there was a case that you would find a lot of magazines just after people read them, they tended to disregard them. And our university has a very strong sustainability and environmental policy, and we wanted to fall in to line up with that. So I made the decision with the team to cut our print run a little bit. But I think the thing I'm most proud of as editor was the fact that we transitioned from glossy paper to 100% recycled paper in all of the issues that we were printing. You can see, this is the last print issue I had as editor. I still have it here because I'm really proud of it. We didn't get to print the last issue, but I'm still very proud of that. And I'm very proud that the editor that I put into place after I left, he's kept that going, and the team, they just kept that entire mentality going. I think that was my favorite thing about it, the whole team mentality, getting involved and working with a team, because I've made so many friends from that. And I've also just I like to think that I've left my mark on student media and, helping other people to get involved in the future. But yeah, that's my 2 cents.
That's great. Thank you so much. I wanted to ask a little bit, maybe just picking up off the back of what Dan said about engagement, both of, I think, sort of 2 things really. There's writers and readers. So do any of you have sort of tips about how to engage either of those? Because often, getting new writers can be quite difficult, or kind of, the workshops in which you kind of talk to people or meet them, the forum isn't accessible enough, or, you only do it once a week. Are there any tips or ideas people have got for how to engage new writers? And then secondly, are there any sort of big tips on how to engage new readers as well? And I'll let anyone come in here.
One way that we've managed to do it is firstly having a really diverse committee in terms of everything, but especially in terms of engagements with societies. And one of the ways that we've involved a lot of societies in the creation of our magazine. So the Black Lives Matter magazine was done in collaboration with our ACS Society, our Woke Society, and Chosen. And our next issue is going to be on the experiences of Muslim students. So we're doing that with Islamic Society. We're doing one on Holocaust Memorial Day, and we're doing that with Jewish Society, and kind of so engaging more students. And a big reason for this is because we are sort of a specialist paper. And if someone sees a politics magazine, they think, oh, I don't want to read about Brexit again. My blanket rule against Brexit in my magazine. And I think that's one way, both for readership and writers, engaging with people who are already engaged in a topic, and also if you make sure that you maybe don't know your committee that well, so they have different groups of friends, which sounds silly, but kind of make sure you have a really inviting and welcoming committee. More people are likely to join, which will broaden the amount of people who know your magazine, will read for it, and will read it and will write for it.
Great. Anyone else?
Yeah, I was just going to say, with ours, I think it was remembering that although we are a newspaper, we're also a student society as well. And I think that those two things go well together, because if we do have regular events, regular meetings, we have like nights out and stuff as well, it does make writers feel more included. Because I think often we could kind of become a little bit insular, but we needed to remember that there are people that are not on the editorial team that are really engaged with Epigram, and giving them a space to kind of like talk to the editors and just have a bit of fun. I think that made it easier to get people to write for us.
Thank you. Anyone else? You don't have to say yes.
I think like sorry, you could go first.
Are you sure, Dad? Okay, thanks. Yeah, no, I just also wanted to say that with our newspaper as well, I think, like Tom was saying, sometimes it can be quite scary with writers to try and integrate themselves into a society which is already established. So one of the things that we tried to do was, just outside of general writers' meetings and editors' meetings, we tried to have specific section socials as well, so that people could get to know their section editors a bit more closely. And then as well as that, just having general just social events as well, which is really nice, just try and get people to talk about their lives outside of the newspaper, because surprisingly we do have lives outside of the newspaper when we try to. And then yeah, I think that also really bounces back nicely with our readership. And I also remember when we did have our week of print, we used to try and get people to actively give out newspapers to readers. So it was almost kind of like forcing it in people's faces, but I think they took it nicely. And I think it definitely creates a mark on campus, you know, that we are established society, that people should actively seek us out.
Great. And Dan?
Okay. Yeah, I definitely agree with everything that Tom, Manvir, and Bethany just said. There's a lot of things you can do to like reach out to people, you know, on campus, because like I find that a lot of people want to write, but they just, you know, they don't have, I guess that insight or that push to actually get involved, or they don't know how to get involved. So I like when we started like the team, we all took an approach of we were not just, you know, writers and editors for the magazine, we were ambassadors for the magazine as a whole. So like just to, you know, raise the brand awareness, we went out and we got these really cool varsity jackets printed, you know, with our title and, you know, like our name and all of that, and like a badge that said, hello, come up and talk to me, I'm very friendly. It's up there hanging on the door now. It's retired, but but like other than that, we have a student journalism society in UCC that like we like to see it as like it bridges the gap between the radio, the paper, and the magazine. So we like to use that as, you know, a nexus point to meet the writers and see what they like, you know, wanted to get involved with. We also help them to put together a podcast. I found doing that was a lot of fun, because one, I love getting involved in podcasts, but secondly as well, I found I got to know the people, like, potential writers a lot more from speaking to them on their podcast and helping them to put it together. And I find if you get involved in that way with people, you can also convince them to give the writing a go. And a lot of our writers did that. And I was very proud as well, because we managed to get quite a few first years giving in submissions, which has always been a problem in the past. I found, like, since I've been there anyway. When I was a first year, I really wanted to get involved, but I just, firstly, I was too afraid to do it. But secondly, I just, I didn't know anyone, and I didn't know how to go about it. But I feel like there's so much untapped talent out there that if you reach out, if you can reach out properly and, get people involved, then your content's going to be, it's going to be a whole lot better, and you're going to get a much more diverse spread of content for people to enjoy. It's a really interesting topic to broach.
I love the idea of the sort of like, come in, we're nice, welcoming people on the office door. That sounds.
We try our best.
Well, yeah, I remember in mine, like, we just had this like office door, and it wasn't see-through or anything. So I think there's just that, like, oh gosh, can I go in? Is it approachable enough for me to just like knock and ask to speak to somebody? So sorry, I quite like that. The next thing I wanted to ask about, it really was kind of like any regrets people had. I mean, I managed to get myself demoted from editor-in-chief to editor because of a blazing row with the SU that when I got to the end of the year, I feel like I could have handled a bit better and not kind of let it escalate so much that it all kind of blew up. But are there any kind of big mistakes that people sort of warn others against? No, everyone just did a completely flawless job.
I'll go, but I think probably one of the biggest mistakes is like letting, it sounds bad, but letting like your student journalism become your whole university experience, and taking a bit too much on and forgetting that you're a student as well. So I think it is important to recognize that you kind of have this job, but you also have this degree to do. So it's finding a balance between that. And I think sometimes you can kind of need to take a step back a little bit, and put things in perspective. But yeah, I think that would be my biggest one.
Yeah, I'd probably build on what Tom just said there. Like, when I was editor-in-chief, I also decided to inflict a bit of torture on myself because I was doing my masters at the same time. So it's definitely a balancing act, and you have to make sure that, like Tom said, your student media is important, and it's an important part of your life, but it can't become your entire life. Like, there were times, for example, coming up to exam season, or when I had to get, when I was working on my dissertation, where I was also, trying to manage, the magazine at the same time. And I found eventually you can't do everything. And I think my biggest mistake was that I didn't, delegate or lean on my team soon enough, because eventually they, I did ask for their help, and they were there for me, and they really helped me to get it done and get everything out of the way and get it out there for people to enjoy. And I think that's my biggest mistake, not trusting the team soon enough, because if you have a good team behind you, and if they support you, and if they're, all committed to the same thing that you are, then you can afford to lean on them, and they can. And likewise, if they need help, they can come to you, and you can, you just need to be a bit, I guess there just needs to be a bit of symbiosis there, me with my fancy words. But yeah, just don't let the whole thing become your whole life, and enjoy it, because it's a really fun to get involved with. And it's probably the thing that I'm most proud of from my time in university, other than getting my degree, of course, and finishing the dissertation.
Congratulations.
Thank you very much.
Bethany, I think I saw your hand up.
Yeah, so I think one thing I'd say is don't be worried to change things. So we are now a part way through the year, and we're adding some new roles because most of my team is in final year, which is another thing. When it comes to diversity of your team, make sure you have diversity of degree stages, because Final year is hard. Anyway, so we're adding engagement officers to make sure that people can engage with like the university, with local businesses, with other student publications, blah, 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 so that the day-to-day things don't always fall on people who are trying to do a dissertation. Another thing that I would say is, in the nicest way possible, expect conflict with your SU unless you are like your SU's paper kind of communication system type thing. Even then, I don't know. That probably happens there. But I am quite good friends with a number of our SABs. So at the beginning of the year, with one of them who I'm very close with, we sat down and we're like, right, there is Incite, Beth, and then there is Beth, which is great because we can have a meeting, shout at each other, and then go and have a pint when that's something that's legal to do. But I think expecting conflict and preparing for it. So in terms of have meetings, have like the rules you will not budge on, but be really not gentle, don't be a pushover, but understand that there are going to be compromises that you're going to have to make. And ensure communication in all different stages. I'm a massive control freak, so at the beginning of the year I told myself I was going to be really good at delegating, which means there was at some parts an issue with communications because someone was doing their own thing, which is amazing. I didn't know, just caused a few extra meetings. Never a problem, but just always make sure your communication is great. Yeah.
Beautiful. Manvir, did you want to come in?
Yes, thank you. I think that with being editor-in-chief, there's kind of a balancing act between the content and the creative side of the newspaper and just developing that, and then just like the everyday managing of what's going on. And I think before I entered, I didn't realize how much of the everyday managing I would have to do, that sometimes you lose sight of the creative content. So I remember at one point, the lifestyle section got someone to do a review of a restaurant in Edinburgh. And this person did a really mean review with no reason at all for the restaurant at all. So I had to call up the restaurant and apologize for this terrible review, which was a lot of micromanaging, which could have gone into creative content. And I think that as well as that, because my handover, I think, was quite sudden too, a lot of it was just trying to get on my feet for being able to handle just the everyday happenings of the newspaper. So I think that if you do have the possibility to kind of have a look at the newspaper before you go in from like an outside lens, and then maybe make a plan for how much time you have and what you'd like to achieve in a step-by-step process, and it makes it a lot more manageable in terms of like creating and understanding and realizing your wider vision for the newspaper, rather than just kind of like going in and thinking, okay, by the end I'd like to do this, but I don't really know how I'm going to get there. So I think step-by-step planning is really important.
That's great. I want to pick up on sort of two things we just talked in that roundabout. The first one being kind of leadership, and how that's like a really unexpected part of the role almost of being an editor. Like you really love journalism, you really love writing, and then suddenly you are like a leader of a team of anywhere between, I don't know, maybe one, but up to like 60 people. And that's a really difficult role to take on because, you know, you're not quite, you might not necessarily be trained to do that. Like to delegate can be quite difficult if you're used to like just being sort of a section editor or an editor or a writer. Suddenly having lots of people underneath you who you can be like, right, okay, I really need to like learn how to kind of trust people and build up people's confidence and let people deal with things. Are there any kind of tips that people had for doing that, kind of like letting editors kind of do their jobs and like not getting too into the weeds and micromanaging? Yeah, sorry.
No, it's okay. Having little meetings at the beginning of the year was really good. So my editorial team actually only has, 4 other people. So even though, you know, we have a news editor, an opinions editor, a features editor, and deputy, if my news editor wants also to help out with opinions, I'm not going to stop them, but it's really important I know exactly what they want to do. So I think having little meetings, being able then to fully compartmentalize the roles. One of our, my deputy editor really likes social media, so does the news editor. So I kind of let them do that. And if there's something that I really, really want to do, I do it. But then there is also the point of whilst you might love this paper and it might be your child, don't let it be your entire life, for the point of like, you've got other things on by virtue of doing a degree, you need to look after yourself. But I think, again, it comes back to good communication. If you feel, I think it's also really important to have a good conversation about that consistently with your deputy, if you have one. So if you feel like something's going wrong, you don't like what's happening, you can talk to them, especially if they maybe have more contact with writers. So I know more people contact my deputy editor first off, so she can tell me if there's something I'm rumbling. And it's just good to make sure that sort of there's a good system in place and everyone knows what they're doing. And then you can control it as much or as little as you want.
Great. Anybody else? So I can see Tom's hand up. Yeah.
So meeting. Yeah, I think having systems in place, as Bethany said, is very important, because especially with Epigram is a pretty huge society in relation to some other student publications. So we had like 70 editors altogether. So having systems in place and processes in place from the beginning, like a complaints procedure, or if what to do if like a writer has written something controversial, like, are you going to stand by the editor, or is it a case that you need to talk to them and take it down, and all of this sort of stuff. You need to, we should have probably done it earlier than we did do, but you really do need to have like a person that complaints can be made anonymously to within the organisation and externally as well, and just making sure that although you are students, you're kind of also, you have, on the committee, you have like a responsibility for people and people's well-being as well. So it's just keep bearing that in mind, I think.
Lovely. Yeah, Manvir.
Hi. So yeah, the editorial team at The Student was roughly about 20 people we had all together. So it was quite a nice big team too. And I think that one of the things that we wanted to do as editor-in-chiefs when we came in was to make sure that our weekly meetings with our editors was more of a conversation, more than just kind of being like, oh, what articles have you got today? Oh, that's great. We'll dedicate these pages in the next spread, and that will be it. And because I think that was very much how our editorials used to be structured before then. So when we came in, we definitely wanted to have more of a conversation about how, in general, we had a vision as co-editors-in-chiefs for the newspaper, but we also wanted editors to contribute to that so that they could enhance that vision. So every week, before we used to get into the nitty-gritty things about delegating pages to different sections, we always used to ask editors what they kind of liked about the previous week's edition, how they wanted to change it, or just anything in between, like changing how writers' meetings went, to just in general how they were feeling about the general atmosphere of the newspaper, which I think is really important with keeping morale up, especially when you're copy editing on a Sunday night till like 3 o'clock in the morning. You definitely need that really lovely spirit with your editors, and I think they're there to enhance your newspaper and your vision as an editor-in-chief, more than kind of take away from it or do their own thing. And I think that's finding that balance, that's so important.
That's a really good point. Dan, did you have anything to add, or shall I move on?
Probably nothing very useful, so probably best to move on.
That's all good. I've had one person message me privately to ask about my allusion to the blazing row with my SU, which I'm happy to talk about if we don't get any more questions. But I hope it doesn't come to that. So if you do have any more, in about 5 or 10 minutes, I'm going to sort of like try and throw open to all the lovely people joining us. So do feel free to get those questions ready. And like I said, you can either pop them in the chat. Might usually better if it's public, because then everyone else can kind of see what's been asked. But if you prefer to message privately, you absolutely can, or you can raise your hand and ask the question yourself. The next thing I wanted to ask about was what I think Bethany alluded to a couple of answers ago, about the sort of the divisions that you kind of managed to create with the friend that you had in the SU as well, and that kind of like management of the difficult sort of relationships. One thing that a lot of publications will struggle with is the sort of relationships between either their students' unions or the universities, and particularly kind of legal threats and things like that. I think, Bethany, you even sort of wanted to talk about this. So I guess, why don't you start, and I'll sort of ask about like what kind of what do you wish you'd known if you were sort of facing like a legal threat or a legal issue or a legal battle? Like, what has your sort of benefit of experience and hindsight taught you?
So we've been relatively safe this year. There's been one article that we have been told we're not allowed to publish, which was difficult. The main issue which happened there was, I'm not saying not us, because I think we're perfect and blameless. I do, but that's one point. But it's that student media at my university was very, it's not part of my uni. You know, I have friends in lots of different universities where student media is such a massive part. It's just not at Surrey, and I would love to, when I leave, that change, and I think that is changing. But it meant that in the summer, when we were writing an article that was about a teacher or a lecturer rather, and I said, right, I know we're going to need legal help. I messaged a member, well, like an officer of our students' union. And because they'd never faced this kind of an issue before, they didn't know what to do. So there was some issues in communication, misunderstandings that made the process move a lot slower, which I personally believe impacted the final outcome. But that's not a rant for now. And I think working with your student union to make sure that they know what to do if they are concerned about the legal implications because of your publishing. And I think it's really good to work with the Student Publication Association on that. If you feel as though you have an underprepared SU, the first time we went to the SPA conference was when I was in second year, so 2 years ago. And I went to like the media law talk by David Banks, and it was the first I heard about it. It was the first that my then editor-in-chief heard about it. So I think really encouraging your SU to know their stuff is probably the best thing. The second is there is a fine balance between communicating with your students' union so that they can help you and not leaking what you're planning. And I think there is an element to which you have to weigh up the benefits. Is it better to come clean about your story you're doing or something you're digging on them, or to make sure that it doesn't hurt you in the long run? And I think there are going to be points where you need to stand your ground. It is fine if fighting isn't quite up your street. Make sure someone else on your committee is happy to do that. And actually, one big tip that I would give to this, as what I would consider still a very new publication, make friends with people who who are in other publications, because they might be able to give tips from past experience. Another kind of reason to work with and be involved with the SPA.
That's very kind. And we've got our first question at the bottom, which we will come to straight after we've done our round. So anybody else want to talk about kind of legal threats, challenges, things they learned, wish they knew?
I was going to say, I don't know if this is the same at a lot of universities, but at ours, there was a kind of a perceived rivalry between Epigram and the tab, the Bristol tab. So I think that's probably similar at quite a lot of universities, where it's almost seen as when a big story is breaking or whatever, it's like a race to see who can get it out first. And sometimes you can fall into the trap of slipping up a little bit on legal issues if you're trying to like get it out before someone else. And I think two things I'd say is it's much better to have it completely accurate and not going to fall into any issues and get it out a bit later. And also, secondly, is ultimately it doesn't matter too much to your readers whether you get it out before the tab. I think as editors of the publication, you probably care the most about who got it out first rather than your actual readers. So yeah, I think that's something to bear in mind as well.
Great, thank you. Anybody else? Don't worry if not.
Oh, I do have something. Oh, sorry, Dan. Do you want to go first this time?
No, it's fine. It's fine. You're fine. I literally just have a little thing to add. Like, I didn't face any legal action when I was editor, but what I did face was like a lot of back and forth with the college saying, "Oh, we want to cut your funding. We don't think that you're pulling in your weight enough." Even though time and time again we have proven, that we're I guess that we provide a service to the student community. But I get, like, my big advice is, like, if you are facing, a funding issue with with your college, is that you stand your ground and just keep putting the work out there and let the work talk for you, because that, like, at the end of the day, that's what we're fighting to, keep putting out there the students' work. Like the year before me, like, it was an even worse situation where they wanted to cut it completely. So what we had to do was we went straight to the students and we had a referendum asking if they would be willing to increase their contribution fees by €5 a year, €3 of which would go towards like student media costs, and the other €2 we made a deal with the students' union would go towards paying for common rooms in satellite campuses. And unfortunately, that couldn't happen during my year, the satellite campuses, just because of like a lot of a legal and technical jargon. But like our SU, they were very supportive of us, and what they did was they agreed to allow us to take that €2 from them until they needed it. So like I think we had a very good relationship with the students' union. It's just like never give up and always stand your ground. That would be my advice. And now I'll let you talk, Manvir.
Thanks, Dan. No, I think I definitely want to go on from what Dan was saying, in the sense that I think it's very easy to think that there is an issue that you should be having with your student union, when really you can actually have a nice relationship with them. So what we used to do with the newspaper was we would have weekly meetings with a representative from the student union, between them, the news editors, and the editor-in-chief. And that was really helpful, because not only just kind of understanding legal jargon, but also for understanding what might be happening within the university that we might not just have caught our eye or anything. So it was great to kind of like have that as a backup for events that we might not know about. And so yeah, then you can have a good relationship with your student union.
I like the idea of a sort of, were you saying it's like a team meeting, or how many people?
So it was a weekly meeting that we used to have on Monday mornings, but just between the editors-in-chiefs and a representative who I think was mainly in charge of advertising in the student union, and then also the news reporters, because I think it's really important that they understand legal jargon too, because they're probably going to be the ones that are more likely to come under that kind of fire. Maybe opinion editors too, because opinions can be dangerous sometimes. So yeah, it was a nice kind of meeting that we used to have, where we'd just have a quick update on what was happening at the university, any events that we should know about, and then any queries that we might have in terms of any articles that we were thinking about publishing, that maybe we should be careful about what we say, and seeing where we could find some kind of middle ground in case there was any kind of argument. So it was quite nice, yeah.
I like that sort of preemptive way of dealing with it. I used to have meetings with the sort of comms SAB through the SU, but I felt that because it was kind of me and her, it could get quite combative. And I think I like the idea more that there's kind of more people there, that the heat can be taken out, and like it doesn't become a sort of clash of personalities, which is kind of what it became with us, as I'm alluding to. So I'm going to move on to the question we've had from, and I hope I'm going to pronounce this correctly, Iwan or Ivan Stone, who asks, to pick up on Tom's point from earlier, but do feel free, anyone, to chip in. Do you have any recommendations for a process to put in place to support writers if a complaint is made against them?
Yeah, so I'll just start off with this. I think actually online complaints process can actually be really good, like a Google form, because then you can have the option of whether it's so this is if people want to make complaints, you can use a Google form it can be anonymous, or they can say if they want to be contacted. And I think in terms of supporting the writer, I think what we did was decide whether the complaint was at a level where we could deal with it as a society or as a newspaper internally, and make sure that people that required the support got that. But also understanding that if it was more serious, then although we were separate to our SU, they are still there, to support us. So trying to deal with like a massive issue just as students yourself, it's probably not the best way to go. So I think my advice would be to have a kind of like almost, I don't want to say a tier system given the current national situation, but a tier system where if it's like a small complaint, it can be dealt with internally, and it can be escalated if needs be as well.
Thank you. Anybody else want to come in on like complaints and how to handle them? Yes, Manvir.
Hi. So with our society, I think in general, the university makes sure that when we are coming into a role in a society, whatever society that may be at the university, we have an online training course that we have to do. And in that training course, there is something where we do have to kind of look at the different student bodies that can deal with welfare, because there's only so much that you as a student yourself can do in terms of being able to support other students. So knowing what other bodies that you could potentially tell people to go to is really important. And then also within our society, we had a welfare officer. So in case anybody did want to lodge a complaint or they just didn't know who to go to, there was someone who was directly there to deal with that kind of stuff, which is really important, and it was really helpful too.
Lovely. Anybody else? If not, we shall move on. No, doesn't it? Sorry about that. I managed to mute myself. What was I going to say? Yeah, this is something kind of personal that I remember sort of vividly from my experience. But I feel like we need to talk a little bit about awards. I found it really hard to sort of plan strategically for them because I was so bogged down in the day-to-day stuff. But they are obviously like incredibly useful, like accolades for kind of coming out and proving that you've really like actually achieved something in that year. Really good for the CV and stuff like that. So does anyone have any sort of tips or a strategy for entering into them? Do you think it's sort of best to like, you know, figure out which ones you want to enter at the start of the year and then like commission pieces around them? Or is there a sort of different system people have got? Bethany?
So I personally don't have an idea of what I want to apply for already, but I don't focus on that in terms of publishing, because I you know, we try and publish, this sounds a bit, but we try and publish like for students rather than for us, if that makes sense. But I want to say the national awards with the SPA ones, June and this January, is that right? Am I correct?
I think that, well, the national ones will be, I think we expect sort of early spring.
Okay, so we generally have an idea, better than that, of when we should be applying. Get many people. It's really, really easy as editor-in-chief to go, I can do that. They take a long time to do. You have to write like a mini article for each one explaining why. And so I'd recommend, we had a big spreadsheet, we had lots of people on it, and then kind of essentially edited them and made sure that everyone was happy with all the entries. And they are difficult. I can't say I have amazing experience in getting our paper shortlisted for multiple awards, but definitely make it a collaborative effort and plan ahead.
Wise words. Anybody else? Yeah, Tom, I can see you.
Yeah, my recommendation for this would be to have internal awards for your publication. So that's what we did. We had Epigram awards. And if you kind of loosely, I mean, we didn't do this, but just thinking about it, if you kind of loosely plan your internal awards based on what the SPA awards are, and that can kind of, you can go from that to kind of developing that application a bit more so you can apply to the SPA awards. But I think it also, it kind of encourages more people than just the senior team to apply for awards, and it kind of keeps people motivated as well. So yeah, we did, I think it was around Christmas, we did some like jokey awards and some serious awards as well. So that's quite a nice thing to do, I think.
I love that idea. And we have got more questions, so feel free to come in if you want, but otherwise we can move on. Yeah, Dan.
Yeah, like awards are a tricky one. Like they're lovely to have, but like I find like I find that it's very easily, you know, if you don't get nominated or if you lose to someone, to like, you know, take that as an absolute loss. I personally think we hang a lot too much on it, and I think I hung too much on it personally, you know, but like you just have to remember that like at the end of the day, like I guess like if you put in, you know, 100% into your work, you know, and if you're proud of it, then that's, you know, like that should be the only thing that matters, you know, that you're proud of the team are proud of the work that they've done. And obviously the awards are they're very nice to have. Like they're a nice, you know, little, I guess, token, like marker of like your success. Like for like here in Ireland, there aren't that many, I guess, awards, like, you know, potential awards you can apply for. Like the biggest ones here are the National Student Media Awards, as we like to call them, the SMedia Awards. And like every year, like student journos around Ireland, like we all apply for it, and we all hope, you know, that we're going to be the person to get shortlisted. But like whenever I applied for it in the past, I always just put in saying, yeah, this like it would be nice to have it, but like if I don't get it, like that's all right. But I was very proud to see like the entire team. We were shortlisted for 12 awards in the SMedia Awards this year. I was very proud of that. And this isn't the flex, but I was also nominated for Best Editor. So that's not a flex at all. But that was yeah. But they're very nice. But at the end of the day, just, you know, I guess don't hang your head on them. And if you do get something, you know, if it's like Best Magazine, or just remember that, you know, it's not just your award. That's the team's award. Like everyone who contributed, everyone who helped with the design, with the social media, you know, anyone who at all helped, you know, with the magazine, that's everyone's award. I just like to remind people of that. Like when there is a success, like it's a collective success. Like we also won the best regional best SPA. Best publication in Ireland from the SPA as well. So thanks, guys. We still appreciate that. Yeah, like it was a collective team win. I just like to remember, you know, that's a really good morale booster and a really good way, you know, rallying the team around the magazine. So that would be my advice. Just, you know, make sure that always congratulate everyone and celebrate everyone's success, not just your own.
That's a very good point. You don't need, you know, a big sort of fancy awards thing to kind of give people like positive feedback that there's going to sort of, you know, make them feel appreciated, basically. And I really love what Tom was saying about, you know, kind of doing internal awards as well. That's great. Manvir, did you want to say anything on this? If not, we've got more questions.
No, I'm good for this one. Thank you.
That's all right. So another question, in fact, before I move on to questions, I've been told to plug the SPA Awards, which Bethany kindly alluded to. But we've got the regional ones, which open later this month, and then the national ones will be in spring. So do look out for those. We've got another question from Ewan, whose name I've very badly mispronounced before, so apologies, who asks, how do you go about handing over to your replacement? Is it worth doing like formal handover documents? Who wants to start?
I'm happy to start if you want. I definitely think it's worth having a formal handover document, just because I think that it would be a bit dangerous to just rely on yourself for one meeting to be able to say everything that's involved in being an editor-in-chief. So I think that's really important. And also it just means that later editors can then kind of add to it and then change it themselves as well. So it doesn't have to be just kind of like a very individual kind of just like, oh, what do I remember about being editor all at once? And the way that my handover worked was that we had a meeting with the former editor-in-chiefs, which wasn't the best time because it was straight after we just had our like 3 a.m. copy editing session. So we were all very tired and we were just kind of like, oh, ready to go home. And then suddenly they were like, okay, time for your handover. And so that wasn't the best handover. So I definitely say doing it when you're in a more logical and rational state of mind, and hopefully like during the day when it's light outside. And I think that even if you don't mind to do everything in just one session, maybe having a second one just for extra questions that you might have over the time period, or just establishing a good relationship with the editors-in-chiefs to come or the formal ones is really important in just making the handover something that's ongoing.
Yeah, loads of really helpful stuff there. Sorry, Tom.
I was going to add, I definitely agree with Manvir about having formal handover sheets or a meeting is really important. And I think something as well is it is important to to kind of step away from the publication, especially when you're graduating, and get rid of the Slack chat that you've been in all these years. But at the same time, what we did, which I think is quite useful, is we set up like just a Facebook group chat with the new editors, and we just kind of said, if there is anything that comes up, you can just message us on here, because we've probably gone through it before. So we called it a little Epigram editors hotline or whatever, so they can always reach us. So I think that's important. But yeah, just try not to try and still exert some influence on the paper using that.
Yeah, I'd agree with both of you there, Manvir and Tom, especially the point about, taking a step back when you are, when your time as editor is done. Like, it was like for me, it's one, like, one of the proudest things that I've done in my, like, for me, one of the things I'm most proud about having doing, and like, I loved every minute of it. And yeah, it is quite difficult when, you have to readjust and you have to realize that you're not the editor anymore. You have to take a step back. But, also, like, don't take, such a step back that you aren't there for the editor when they need you. Like, for example, the editor now, like whenever he needs me, he can just shoot me a Facebook message and I just give him advice. We have Zoom calls sometimes. Like, I never I never tell him what he should do. If he asks me, for advice on something, I don't say, yeah, go and do this, go and do that, because, like, although I'd love to, I'm not the editor anymore. It's just about being there and, supporting them through the handover, but also beyond the handover. If you're comfortable doing that, just, being there as a lifeline, if they, or just, like an extra ear if they need a bit of an opinion on a piece or they need a bit of advice. It's just all about, I guess, what's the word? Just making sure that you don't overstep the boundaries that are now there, between you, like, since, you were the editor before, but you're not now. And yeah, that's my 2 cents on that.
Thank you. Anybody else that wanted to come in? No, I think that was really, really good stuff. And I loved what Manvir said about, like, having a sort of second handover just in place if there's stuff that you forget. The only other suggestion I think I would add is, like, try not to compile the handover documents and stuff like that right at the very end, because there is undoubtedly stuff that you've forgotten that you've missed. So I would just try to have, like, a rolling document that you throw stuff into as it comes up, as you think about it. Because if you try and look back at the end of the year, you will not remember all of the things that you encountered, and the, like, small things where you're like, oh, I wonder how I do this, and that you solve very quickly. Tom, I wanted to ask you a little bit specifically about, like, your experience. Obviously, on digital, you were the sort of digital, like, the head of digital at Epigram for a while, and we said as well that was also, I think, during a time when they won a few SPA awards for the digital coverage and stuff like that. A lot of papers, magazines will have struggled with that sort of, like, pivot to digital, sort of wanting to hold on to the prestige of still printing, but struggling because they know that they have to compete with websites, like the Tab. Are there any sort of things, do you think, that people, when they sort of come in right at the beginning of the year, if the digital stuff isn't up to scratch, that they can really do to kind of lift it off the ground at the start?
Yeah, so there's a couple of things. One thing I wanted to say was, when I first came into the role, all the sort of the technical digital stuff can be a little bit intimidating. So we've got, like, a content management system, and the stuff we want to do, like an app, which personally I don't have any knowledge of to be able to do that. But I think if you remember that you have this whole wider university around you with student newspapers, can quite often be quite, like, arts and humanities based. You don't really usually get that many sciencey type people in it. But what we did was we got some computer science people in as web developers, and it was one of those another guy called Tom, who made the app in the end, which really helped our digital stuff. So now we've got an app of the newspaper. Another thing I think is not seeing the digital and the print as completely separate things. So we Epigram use a platform called Issue to publish the newspaper online as well. and I think that can be like a way of it coming together, and you can make little videos of like the newspaper, and with Instagram as well. We started doing we have like an arts and kind of lifestyle magazine as well called The Croft, and what we started doing was like kind of artsy photos of people reading the magazine and reading the newspaper. And I think in that way, yeah, not seeing them as two separate things. Probably the final thing is that when I inherited Epigram, we still do use the content management system called Ghost, which is kind of quite slick and quite sleek and easy to use. But a couple of years ago, Epigram used to use WordPress, and I wasn't there at the time, but from people that were there, apparently it was kind of really horrible in terms of like really messy. There were so many different plugins. It was so hard to understand everything. So I think if you're kind of listening to this and thinking that sounds a bit like my paper, I think I'd say don't be scared of kind of like starting again with a new system which is easier to use. It'll be a bit of extra work, but in one way you can see is that's your kind of contribution to the paper going forward, that you've made that so much easier for future editors. Yeah, so that would be, I think, yeah, my biggest piece of advice would probably be to use other people's expertise in doing digital stuff if you're not completely okay with it. And another thing I just remembered then is we did quite a lot of video and audio stuff with like a podcast and video content. And I would say don't never pay to learn all of this stuff. So much of this stuff is free to learn on YouTube. So I spend many an hour at my laptop learning how to do all these different things just through YouTube videos. So yeah, don't underestimate the power of free learning materials. And then there's like Code Academy as well. So if you want to try and learn how to do like CSS and stuff a bit better for your website, that's one to have a look at.
Thank you. Did anyone else have any kind of like digital tips they wanted to share? Again, fine if not, because we've got bags more questions. Cool. The next question was from Emily, who asks, how much of a jump is it from being on the editorial team to being in a senior position on the student paper? I guess that will apply to magazines and just sort of websites as well. I feel like for me, it was like a massive jump, but one I wanted to do. Does anyone else sort of have a different experience or feel the same? Yeah, Dan.
Yeah, that's a good question, Emily. It's definitely, it can definitely be a big jump. And for me, when I was becoming editor, there is, you know, at first there's like that sense, a bit of an overwhelming sense, oh crap, I'm going from just, you know, managing one section to managing the entire magazine. How am I going to do this? But like, my biggest advice is just remember, like, you love the magazine or your paper, like you're passionate for what you do. And like, obviously when you applied for it, there was something, you know, that you saw that you either wanted to double down on, to keep doing, or to improve about the publication. So when you're going in, like, just keep in mind your goals, like set yourself goals. Like for me, when I was becoming editor, when I applied for editor, I wanted to firstly, like I said, improve the social media and online traction, but also like give us a clean, you know, fresh, new look with our design. And like, I'm happy that I managed to accomplish both of those things thanks to my team. But like, that's my biggest advice. Keep those clear goals in mind. And obviously you might change your mind as you go along, or you might, you know, get new goals, and that's okay as well. You just have to, you know, be willing to work on the fly with that stuff. But just go in with a bit of a plan, like, and it makes it, you know, a lot easier to, you know, transition, and a lot easier to cope with it, you know, at first. And like, when you see your the first issue of your paper or your magazine published in print, then that's when the feeling comes, and you realize, oh my God, I'm actually doing this. Wow, how did I do it? And it's the best feeling in the world, I promise you. So if you are, you know, on the fence about applying, it's okay, do it. It's a lot of fun, and you won't regret it.
Beautiful. Yes, Bethany.
It's a big jump, And I think the main thing, what Manvir has said before, is you, in my experience at least, you do less writing and you do more admin, which doesn't feel as fun. And I'm not gonna, I love being editor-in-chief. I don't mean to sound like I don't, but the feeling of pride and accomplishment really does come when those boxes come, in my experience, to your house. Don't do that, get it delivered to your uni. Boxes and magazines, heavy. And especially when your campus is called Stag Hill for a reason. Anyway, it's difficult, but because you're in charge, you can change things. And I think don't feel as though you have to keep doing something the same if it's not working. The point is you are there to make the paper the best it can be, and it's not going to be the best if your team and you are struggling. So things like adding new roles, changing your print schedule, changing the topics you focus on, making it work for you and your team and the environment. And I think that's especially important when you're creating a paper in a pandemic. Maybe when your SU has less money, you have less money, uni has less money, whatever. Things are changing so much this year that if you want to adjust, you're allowed to do that and you should do that. But it's a big jump, but it is worth it because I've had this paper for ages and I still want to show it off at every Zoom call I go into. I'm so proud of it. It's worth it. It's a big jump.
Manvir, how did you manage the change?
I think that one of the biggest changes for me becoming editor-in-chief was just realising how little contact I had with writers, which I think was something that I really missed from going from features editor to editor-in-chief. And I wouldn't change that. I think it was a really good experience actually for realising the difference between the two. And I think that was something that I could only really understand having gone into the role. And as everybody has been saying too, I mean, this isn't a permanent job, it's like a university society, and it's so important that this is the opportunity to dabble in places and find out where you are comfortable. So for me, it was a really nice point of understanding where if I were to go into journalism, which bit I'd like to focus on more, whether or not it was the kind of general managing or whether or not it was more specific writing. And then I think as well on a personal note too, I think that becoming editor-in-chief was, especially as a woman of colour as well, was really something that other people looked up to and highlighted as well, which I never noticed myself because I saw it as a very personal thing. And then for other people to then notice that, I think inspired a lot more people who may not have seen the newspaper as something that was completely open to diversity as something that was actually really much more bigger than that. And it's all about breaking glass ceilings in that sense. And I don't know, getting as many voices in as possible. So I think it was really important becoming editor-in-chief, yeah.
Lovely, thank you. And Dan, I can see that it's gotten much darker in that room than when we started. The sun has definitely gone down.
Welcome to winter in Ireland.
Well, speaking of which, I wanted to ask you if you found that there are sort of substantial differences being over there to kind of what you hear about student publications and running them in the UK.
I don't know, differences. There are a lot of similarities. Just the way, that we go about publishing the magazine and the way we market it. I think the biggest thing is definitely I've noticed that a lot of the magazines and papers in England, they're either run by the SU or their societies, where a lot in a lot of cases over here in Ireland, not so many are linked to a students' union. I know of a few, but that wouldn't be the majority thing. And I think the biggest difference as well is that I always hear that a lot of editors and a lot of writers are actually elected in the UK, where they're nominated rather than being hired through an interview process, which is how it's done here a lot here. And also this, I guess that we are a much smaller population as well, so I guess there is a less of a readership, but also I guess a bit from what it looks like here, less opportunities, I guess. For example, I know in the UK you have a lot more you have for example the NCTG, you have, I think I said that right, and you have other opportunities for student journalists to continue their career. Over here it unfortunately can be a very much of a who you know and not what you know type of thing. So you do have to try and get your foot in the door, and it can be difficult. But when you do, manage to pull it off over here, it is like it is a massive achievement. It's just, I guess, I would say it would be more difficult to get into the industry here than what I see from the UK. Of course, that could be wrong. Like I might just be, perceiving things wrong, but that's just the way it looks, looking out from inside this window.
It's a good thing it looks a little bit more accessible, although I don't know just how good it is, but that might be more of an indictment on how hard it is over there rather than how easy it is over here. Manvir, I couldn't we obviously only got the last 15 minutes left, so I couldn't get away without asking you about the editorial that you wrote about. The Everything is Fucked one, which we've now talked about once or twice. I just wondered basically what you thought you discovered off the back of it in terms of how it's best to kind of engage with the whole student community.
Yeah, I think one thing that I think I've already said about my time as editor-in-chief that I thought was really important was just trying to bring back student engagement and making everybody realise that this is a student paper, it's not a professional newspaper, even though that is really important as a jumping ground. But I think there is that informality that you can play with in a student newspaper that we were starting to lose sight of. So in our final editorial, my co-editor and I just decided that we just wanted to go out with a bang. And I think especially because we can see how print editions have gone down just by looking at them and how they change at various sites. So when we brought out this edition, I think people were very stunned by the cover, and we definitely saw that a lot of people had picked them up more. And it was picked up by the Scotsman, which is really nice. And it was a really interesting point as well about kind of how not just journalism as a whole, but student journalism itself is under danger to a certain extent. I think that is a wider issue in the journalist industry. And I think it's really important understanding how we can not just fund ourselves, but also bring people into the cause who aren't directly a part of it and make them care about it too. So I think this was a really important way of using a cheeky bit of clickbait to make this thing known to everybody. So I have no regrets.
Good, it's the way to be. Well done, honestly. And yeah, only another 10 minutes left. I've got one more question from somebody else, but then I wanted to ask Bethany about the specific challenges that you found with magazines. I'm thinking particularly designs. You sort of said you've got a really great drawer, I think, for the front cover that you showed us. What have you discovered about kind of what works, what doesn't work, how you sort of lay out the magazine and stuff like that?
So we are going to be doing a slight design jazzing up in the coming issue. There's the slight issue of time. We don't actually have a student paper at our uni. We have two student magazines. One acts as the student paper in magazine form. So we have kind of that as gentle, friendly competition. The main thing that we've tried to do is have a very bold cover, really stating what we do. So we used to have, so there's another one somewhere, but you don't need to see me rooting around my bedroom. We used to have the title, then 3 headlines of what was in the magazine, then sort of a more, normally just a picture of the uni, maybe a broad picture, something political. This one is a drawing of a photo from the Black Lives Matter march in Guildford. Then says Black Lives Matter underneath. This was our Black Lives Matter issue. Every single article is related to that subject. We wanted readers to know that immediately. The issue before that, I'm going to forget, was one of the big stories was on plagiarism rates. So we had a cool drawing that the same artist did of eyes. The general election issue, we had Surrey. We've waited long enough. We need you to give a shit about politics, using the very similar technique of swearing to get students interested, which I can, definitely back up Manvir in it. Students like it. It's fun. We did give that out though at the hustings for the general election, and a child took it from a bit awkward, but I just let them go. So I think the main thing that I can say is make sure your front cover looks really eye-catching immediately. Having an artist on is great, because it also means that if people don't want to write, they can still be involved in the magazine. It's also just, you know, people, the artist is a politics student, she just doesn't love writing articles. So it's just a really nice way to up engagement in different ways. Make sure that your format is accessible. Have a quick check into which fonts are like dyslexia friendly and easy read, because sometimes it's really tempting to have like a big double spread full of different fonts and pictures, and it can actually just be really overwhelming, not necessarily very accessible for everyone to read. We just like having quite a standard way of designing, and then this was one thing to sort of break it up. The theme of our Black Lives Matter issue was Black excellence. We wanted to highlight students at the university who, you know, our university has been criticised quite a lot before for not highlighting students, Black students, and the amazing things they do. Our awards that we get at university often go to white students, so we did sort of our own. And here is like a cool way that we've done it, and that is in the middle of a bunch of articles. I'll put down my child now. But I think communications with lots of different people, I might want the magazine to look one way, but actually everyone else who reads it might want it to look another. So again, part of communication with the rest of your team, making sure that everybody can access and read it, and engaging with as much students as possible is probably a much faster way to say everything that I just said.
Oh, I thought that was all very worthy, all very good. I can see one more question in the chat, so we will end with that one, unless there are any more. If there is, then we've got a few more minutes, but otherwise we'll end with this one. They're asking, how do you make sure that a big story you've done gains the wide-reaching attention and impact that it deserves? Which I guess is difficult. Like often, you know, the big worthy investigations sometimes like don't get as much attention or readership as the more either clickbaity or kind of, I don't know, maybe you just call it user-friendly stuff. Sorry, Bethany, did you have your hand up?
Yeah, sorry. So we had this a couple of years ago. This was like a big story that I did on investigations into sexual assaults within our university sports teams. So firstly, write the story. Do things like make sure the headline is SEO friendly. Make sure it's not too wordy. That's actually a mistake that I did with the headline. I'm not great at headlines now. I was really bad at them then. To make sure that like it will just come up in search engines, especially if it goes online. Never be scared to get in touch with local and national papers. I worked with Che, who is the events officer. He might be on the Zoom, I'm not sure. I mean, I know he's watching. And the story went into the Telegraph and sort of gained national media attention. Don't think that that is not a step you can take. We've done that with lots of stories actually, and it's gone to local media as well as national. Share it around to like departments, to societies. Don't publish your story and let it sit. Share it. Again, sharing with the SPA and other publications is really, really good. I think the board like wrote an article on our story as well, which was grand. So just kind of communicating, pushing it. It would be really nice if it just went out and then was picked up immediately, but there sometimes needs to be, the push needs to continue after it's been published, and it's always worth it, I promise.
Great. Yeah, I think like specifically sharing in like Facebook groups can be quite useful. Like don't expect everyone to kind of come to you, like do a bit of effort, you know. There's no end of like Facebook groups and stuff that students are in, like society stuff, accommodation stuff. Like A, it's a good place to be to like pick up stories, but B, it's a good place to then actually like share the stuff that you do that you think is going to be interesting to them. Anybody else on kind of like tips for like increasing readership, but like I guess among stories that you've done and you're like, how do we get more readers? Tom?
Yeah, I was just going to say two things. So one is I'd probably focus a bit more on what to do after your story's been picked up rather than how to get it picked up, because I think from my experience, you can't really make a game plan to get your story in national paper. It doesn't really work like that. So I would say once a story does start blowing up a little bit, then it's important for you to retain ownership of it, and you're kind of reminding yourself that you're not selling the story to someone. You're you're the person that's written this, and if it gets picked up, then you should have credit, and all of this sort of stuff. And from my experience, I did a story, not when I was digital editor, but when I was working in the feature section of the paper. I did something with the BBC. And the reason why I did that was because it was quite a kind of like a technical story about landlords, about like rogue student landlords. And I knew that me doing kind of having no background in journalism, I wouldn't be able to really do that story the justice that the students that were affected deserved. So I kind of approached, fortunately in Bristol, the BBC is based there. They have an office there. So I was able to kind of pitch that to them. And then I worked with the BBC for about 6 months on that. And then eventually it went out. And we kind of did it together rather than I pitched them and they took it and kind of like left me high and dry. We kind of made an arrangement where we would be able to publish something and they would as well. And there's a bit of kind of like mutual respect between the publications. But yeah, I think sometimes national journalists can sometimes look on student journalism as a bit lesser, and they will just try and take the story from you. And you just have to kind of stand your ground and be confident in the fact that you're not, as a lot of people say, and it's true, you're not a wannabe journalist or an aspiring journalist. You are a journalist if you're doing this sort of thing. So yeah, I guess take ownership of the stories that you come across and write.
Preach, I want that on like a bumper sticker. You're not an aspiring journalist, you're a journalist. And we've only got a few more minutes left. So Manvir or Dan, anything that you wanted to add? No, all good. Okay.
Not qualified.
Well, don't worry. There's one more question in the chat. And as we've only got a few minutes, it's almost too hard to do in 30 seconds, but let's give it a go. Let's try and slim down the answers. This one is, should editors be actively preparing for a digital heavy / only future? Or do we think that the print side of student papers are going to remain a primary output? Anyone want to give their sort of 30-second hot take? Dan, straight away.
Yeah, this is something that I came up against when I was the editor. That like, yes, we don't want to lose that sentimentality you get with the print run, because believe me, when when you submit your first article and you get it published in print for the first time, that feeling, that's a feeling that can be matched by anything. And I don't want that, I don't want anyone to miss out on that feeling. But at the same time, if you don't adapt to, like the rising tide of new digital media, for example, like I guess digital publications, but also podcasts, videos, all of that stuff. If you don't, adapt to that, you may find that your audience will leave you behind, because that's just the way audience, that's what audiences want nowadays, especially younger audiences, which, student demographics usually are. So I think it's important to adapt and, adapt and like learn to use these new methods of media, but also don't let the physical die. Like, it should be a blended approach, in my opinion. It should be, you should be leaning on both. You should be using the digital to supplement the physical, but also the digital. You just need, I guess, like it's a 50-50 approach, and you need to make sure that you are giving attention to both.
You sound optimistic about there being a future for both.
I like to think of it anyway.
Anybody else want to give their 30 seconds thoughts? Yes, Manvir.
Hi, really quickly. Yeah, I think that a lot of people often think that there's like a balancing act between digital and print, when really I think they can exist and thrive in their own ways. And I think digital, we just have to all admit that that's going to be the future of journalism, and how that affects printing is both like mutually exclusive but also linked in certain ways. But I think focusing on digital is so important. So I was lucky enough last year to do work experience at the Times, and I worked in their digital interactive team, and it was really interesting to see how important they were seen by the rest of the working like colleagues as well. So for example, at the beginning of like the big editor meetings that they used to have at the beginning of the week, it was the digital editor who used to be one of the first people to speak, because it's so interesting to just see how you can look at real life statistics and just see how that affects your readership. And I think that's really something important to hold on to, and not just kind of like sigh at and see just like the fall of print, because it is nice to have a physical paper, but I think it's good to be ready for digital.
Lovely stuff. Tom, yeah.
Maybe I'm a bit biased because I was the digital editor, but I'm quite optimistic about the digital kind of where student journalism is going in general. And I think if you look, I've been following, because I live in Manchester, some of the stuff that Mancunian's been doing on the protests, and the fact that you can go out with a camera and actually capture this stuff. And I think they videoed some of the student protests, and it was going viral on Twitter and all of this sort of stuff. And Epigram as well, with the kind of testing that's coming in, the coronavirus testing, they actually got invited into the testing centre and did a video tour to show all the students and stuff. So I'm quite excited about the direction of student journalism. I think it's being professionalised at quite a rapid pace, which I think is good. And I think, yeah, video especially is somewhere that I think it is quite an exciting direction.
Fantastic. I'm loving all this positivity. Bethany, can you give us some positivity to finish us off?
Yes, so I think one thing I can say is it is possible to have a good balance between digital and print if you still are dedicated to printing. I'm a massive print fan, probably given away by how I can't let go of my magazine. But we have a deal with our student union where we do a small print run, and then if it's really popular on print, we can do another one. That's for this year when budgets are much, much smaller than normal. But we put our digital issues up. We also put individual articles from our magazines onto our website. And it's really good. It gives you lots of skills as well in terms of SEO techniques. And I freelance at The Independent, which is completely digital, and I can promise you that it is important to get your news online, and it works and it's great. So don't be too dismayed if you aren't holding as many physical copies of your magazines in your hands as you were before.
That's brilliant. I'm so glad we managed to get through all the questions. I know we're 3 minutes over time, but all that remains for me to say is like a massive thanks to everyone. Like, I really wish that I'd been able to listen to an event like this when I was kind of starting out. I think there's so much to be learned, and we don't kind of pay enough attention to all of the issues that we've talked about today. So really big thanks to Tom and Veer, Dan and Bethany, and of course on the SPA side, Ben and Che, who've been dealing with the sort of tech and social media side. So if there are people in your mentions, blame Che. But yeah, thank you very much again, everyone, for coming, and have a lovely rest of your weekend. And there's lots of thank yous in the chat as well, which is nice.